Hey everybody, this is Dylan.
This is Regina.
This is Raika.
This is Rasad.
This is Caribou.
This is Carl.
This is Jonathan.
This is Pat.
This is Ibtisam.
This is Jeremy.
Welcome to House of X,
Where we're just a fanboy and a fangirl fanning around, talking about all the things we love, about everything related to X-Men and comics and media.
and today we are actually having a special BIPOC or BIPOC roundtable discussion. And as you heard, Regina and I have 10 guests with us. This is the most guests that we've ever had. So this could either be incredibly awesome or a train wreck, but we wanted a lot of voices on this particular topic. Regina, what are we going to be discussing today?
Well, today we have a lot of kind of more general questions about being BIPOC representation, and just kind of some general discussion about portrayals in the media, what we love, what we don't love, what we need more of. And we wanted to pose some of these questions to you all. In the future, we hope to do this more maybe character-centered or story-centered perhaps. But today we just wanted to do something kind of just general, get our feet in the water. I really think that when we have discussions about race and culture and ethnicity and all of these different things that make up parts of the fandom, when we talk about these things on Facebook or on Twitter, it can get very heated and very divisive because we can't read tone. It's really hard to read tone. And most of us, I think, are pretty pleasant in person. But we did want to have something a little bit more intimate and get to know other points of view, because all of us are going to have a completely different way of interpreting things based on who we are and our experiences. I happen to be a Mexican-American woman, but I was not raised in a traditional Mexican-American family. I was raised in Alabama in the 1980s, a very small town just south of the Appalachian Mountains. So that was somewhat a harrowing experience. I was always othered as a result. It was difficult trying to melt these two different families together. So I have a white stepfather whose family was Southern Baptist, and my mother was this Mexican woman who had been divorced, and she was Catholic. And I don't know if you guys know about Catholics in Alabama, but it doesn't meld well. So I ended up moving back to Texas to be around my mom's family when I was in middle school. But then I moved to Arkansas, and my school was primarily African-American, which until that point, most of the schools I had been to were fairly integrated, but this school had a very high population of African-American people. So I kind of experienced this culture shock. And I had culture shocks like every 4 years growing up. I think it made me a more rounded person. But I also know that because of that, I don't see things the way a lot of other people do. Even my family members, we don't see things at all the same way, because I was always othered and I always saw a different part than what they saw. So that's one of the reasons that we invited so many of you today. And I'd like to know a little bit more about each of you and kind of how you came up and what you think has been the major influence on how your perception is and what your experience growing up has been. So Raika, would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, let's see. I was raised in the Bay Area, California. My family is from the South, Louisiana, Tennessee, pretty much all the southern states. My father's side is known commonly as Black Indian. My mother's side is known as Creole and Indian as well. We go by indigenous, but that's the most common term used. For me, it was difficult growing up because I was, in my generation, I was the dark skinned one. So in recent years, I've been recalled a different, been relabeled brown skin. There's light skin even at one point, which really kind of messes with your psyche when all your life you've been told you were dark skin. Also, sorry, I had a little low battery thing there, but it's charging.
You're fine.
Also with Indigenous, it's only been in the most recent years that I'm included in Indigenous communities. But again, it's a skin color thing. So it's too dark to be Indigenous, too light to be Black kind of thing, but can't be anything else. So I really kind of turned to horror sci-fi, but sci-fi and comics really, to just kind of have a whole new realm of life to live that was different from our own, where at least the ones that I read, I didn't have to deal with that. It was just about, this whole fantasy that was in the comic or the movie that I was watching. So.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Rasan.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rasan. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. And if you know Brooklyn, I am from Brooklyn. I always say I'm from Brooklyn, BG, as in before gentrification. I'm from a neighborhood called Fort Greene that, if you ever watch She's Gotta Have It, that's the neighborhood that takes place in. And I am a native there. So people always treat me like I belong in a wildlife preserve. They're like, you're from here? For me growing up, I gravitated toward comic books, specifically X-Men books and science fiction, again, because of knowing otherism, or what it's like to be othered as both an African-American person and as a queer person. And I think even before we all became familiar with the term intersectionality and what that concept was, the X-Men were already showing that in a lot of ways, especially with the all new, all different X-Men, and seeing different iterations of these mutants. So I think for me, even as a child, before I had the wherewithal to kind of understand all that, conceptualize it as I do now as an adult, it resonated with who I was going to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. I think almost all of us, including me, the only white person here, can slightly understand that with being queer. Caribou.
Okay. Hi guys, I'm Caribou. I was actually born and spent my formative years in Saudi Arabia. My dad worked for Aramco. My mom is from the Philippines. My dad's Black from New Orleans. Both my grandparents on both sides are Native American. So there's a lot going on there. I'm a big mutt. Yeah. And when we moved to the States, it was really strange because, like, as a kid, I felt a lot of freedom, and there wasn't a narrative. There wasn't so much the U.S. narrative of like what my skin tone meant and like what my ethnicity meant and blah blah blah. But like I remember just being like really incensed as a kid when like when my parents kind of broke it down to me a little bit, about like what this.
I think it's frozen.
Yeah.
National. I ended up gravitating, I think, towards books like X-Men and really like having a global sense of like, what my imagination lent to. I was like at first kind of a little weebo. I loved anime, that kind of thing. But I remember the first time that I read that Storm was also a person that was like, oh, hell no, when it came to how she was perceived in America, you know what I mean? And like I also gravitated towards Monet because of like having this rich like family history and like whatnot, and then also being like I refuse to let my otherness be the thing that like allows people to get me down. And so that's why I gravitated to like characters like that, and where I gravitated towards X-Men, because it was about community and people coming from different backgrounds to like really pursue their passions or like defend each other or like help each other figure out like why they fit into this like senseless narrative. So that's really what did it for me. And so I'm still here, like loving these guys.
Well, thank you. I have a feeling that's what does it for all of us, and we're gonna hear it. We're gonna hear it a lot. But Carl, go ahead and go next.
Which is really funny because I went after Rasan and Caribou, but I'm full Filipino. I actually live in Brooklyn currently. I was born in the Philippines. I moved to the U.S. at the age of 10, and so definitely understanding kind of the immigrant feeling of coming into a new place, and then going to school in college down south, and like talking with Regina, and it's really super nice to kind of connect in that, just stories in general, and that's what it is, right? You connect to the characters based on their stories and what happens to them and how they react to things and how the world sees them, and you really feel that connection about how the world sees you, and even a fear, right? Being somebody who's brown, and being somebody who is gay, and like and being an immigrant, and you kind of sense all of these things, or people just asking, what are you? Those things are super important. And if we talk about Monet and her skin tone, I have a different skin tone for a different season, and so like she doesn't have to have a skin tone. Her skin tone changes, just like a lot of people's skin tone changes. I get darker and I get mistaken for something else, versus winter, I'm a little lighter and I get mistaken for something else. And so those kinds of things are super important. And those are the things that really get me there. And for my entrance into the comic world I was obsessed with Superman when I was younger, but that was, every kid did. But it was more of when I was obsessed with Street Fighter. Street Fighter 2 was out. I was looking for every place in the Bronx that had the Street Fighter arcade game, and the places that had them were pizza shops or this one comic book shop. And I just remember, when you place your quarter on the screen, you're waiting because it's your turn. And I just looked around and I finally observed, I was like, oh, this place is different. There's people from different places, people dressed differently, and they're talking to each other like they're friends, and they're getting into arguments, but everybody was welcome in this one space. And I understood how sacred it was. And I remember that Uncanny X-Men comic book of Storm, like laid out, and Colossus saying, Havoc, why did you kill Storm? I was like, what is this? And I picked it up and I opened it up. And then, people were like, hey, you can't touch it like that. And I was like, why is this thing so important? And then you read and you were like, oh. And I just kept coming back. And I wasn't coming back because of the game. I was coming back because of the people that were in it. It's probably one of the reasons why I kind of became an educator, was because I wanted to create that space where I didn't feel that comfortable in school, for other people to feel that comfortable in that space as well. And so that's what got me there. Many years later, still doing it.
Issue 248. I think that's 248.
I think it is too.
Nice.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us, Carl. Jonathan.
Hey, so I'm Jonathan. I grew up in the 80s, as I look a lot younger than I actually am. And my mom's a teacher, my dad was in the military. And we bounced around a lot. And it was really hard being, skinny little Black kid with Coke bottle glasses, living on military bases, trying to fit in with all these white kids, and being the only one sometimes, it was really difficult. And I remember I found an issue of Excalibur at a yard sale. And I was like, ooh, what is this? And it went from there to, my mom kind of like noticed I had an interest, and I dived deep into sci-fi. I mean, sci-fi and comics, I love that escapism. The X-Men became a thing for me really when I was in middle school. It was the first time we had moved back to the States, and I was going to public school. And so I was around other kids, other Black kids. And I started to realize that I was even different from them. Like I was so much of an outcast. I'd been, granted all the beautiful things that my family were able to provide for me, I didn't have that connection with my own community. And they let me know that I did not have a connection with them. And in the X-Men and in the group of friends that I found in middle school, I found a home. I found characters who I could totally relate to, who were, there was, at that time, there was Gambit, who was the new guy who nobody really trusted. There was Logan, who was just grumpy all the damn time. There was Storm, who was this, I was floored by Storm, because here it was, this Black character who wasn't angry all the time, and she wasn't this stereotype of most Black characters that we had seen in growing up in comics. She was this regal and just goddess, and quite honestly, the most capable leader the X-Men have ever had. Just saying.
True.
That was this amazing world that I kind of got pulled into, and I never left. It's always been a home. It's always been like, whenever I'm down, I don't care how crappy the X-Men movies are, I put them on and it makes me feel great, because there's something about when I see that crest outside of that mansion that says it's Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. And I remember being a kid going, damn, I wish I could have gone there. That's my place. That's my people. That's where I would have fit in. There was something about, again, no matter how crappy the movies are, the first time I saw, Cyclops' eye beam on screen, lost it. The first time Wolverine popped his claws, lost it. I remember watching the animated series and you couldn't tell me crap on Saturday. Don't talk to me while the X-Men is on. It changed my world fundamentally. It changed how I interact with people. It changed how I interact with family, because you don't know where everybody's coming from, and we all have something a little bit different, something that we're a little shy about, or something that we feel a little bit off about, and embracing that difference. Took me a while, but went from being a little skinny nerdy kid with Coke bottle glasses in the 80s to being a grown ass man who's skinny and nerdy with Coke bottle glasses and happily queer in 2021. That's an amazing journey I don't think I could have taken if I didn't have comic books and the X-Men and science fiction to give me that escape, to find a world that I fit in.
I love that, Jonathan. Pat, you'll go next, please.
Okay. I'm Pat. I am also from the Philippines. I immigrated to the US when I was about 11 years old. And my parents were living in suburban Salt Lake City, Utah, because they moved there from California, like smart people, whatever. So yeah, that's sort of like the environment I grew up in. And obviously it was a lot of like culture shock, because like moving into a new country in a new place, like in, with no offense to anyone here, like deep Mormon country. If you are, you just let me know so I restrain myself. But so there's that layer of it. But there was also like a strong Filipino community there, but a lot of, if not, no, actually all of the kids all went to Catholic school, but I didn't. So that sort of developed kind of like a very cliquey community among them. So I didn't really feel very accepted, both because like I just moved there and like I'm a stranger and they're all like going to Catholic school and I'm going to public school, but which is not a thing I regret, by the way. Like I actually, okay, funny sidebar, my parents tried to send me to Catholic school and then I failed the entrance exam on purpose because I was like, nope, that is not happening. I will not be going to Catholic school, thank you. Type of a thing. Comics, so yeah, I think I've always been a comic reader ever since I ran across like a stray issue of Justice League in my cousin's house. And there's sort of this happy convergence between being exposed to the comics and then the cartoons coming out in the 90s, which were being shown in the Philippines as well. So that's exciting. That sort of converged to make me like a lifelong fan. And I think like my relationship to this fandom has evolved like mutants, like throughout the years, and it's changed a lot. At some point in this thing, I'm sure Dylan will bring up my email at some point.
I will, don't worry.
There you go, because it's a favorite thing that he does. But I feel like it's changed and evolved. But like I think for the reasons that other people have said, like I will always be an X-Men fan in some fashion. Like there's just something I think like that's a stupid, I'm gonna say it anyway. There's something brilliantly clever about like this mutant metaphor that allows a lot of people sort of access to feel like they're part of that in some way. And it does a lot of
Yes.
work, I think, um, where like it doesn't have to be a one-to-one type of a thing. Like as many of you know, like my queen is not an Asian, but like, but there's a lot of ways to like hook into that metaphor, which I think is very cool.
Mhm.
Thank you. Ibsisam, if you'll go next.
Sure. So I'm getting the feeling that I'm probably the only one here who's never been to the States. I'm from Bangladesh, born and raised. I'm currently living in the UK, and I've been here for the past 10 years. But I grew up in a country where I was always the ethnic majority. Um, but I was also consuming a lot of Western culture. So we got loads of US TV shows, we got loads of British TV shows. We didn't get as many comics. I kind of got into comics through the animated series. But so I had this really strange experience of knowing I'm not a minority at home, but knowing that somewhere globally I'm seen as a minority because I never saw myself on TV, not in like international shows. Um, so I gravitated again towards the few people of color and the few visibly people of color I could spot. Storm was always my favorite. I loved her to bits. But I think growing up, I began to also realize, well, hang on, why do we have so few people of color? Like, I remember all of my friends kind of gravitating towards Storm, and then kind of us realizing that a lot of the reasons we do that is because she's one of the most visible and constant people of color, but she's Black. I'm not Black. And it kind of just felt like, where's my representation? And I sometimes still struggle a lot with that because it often feels like um, the comic book universe still kind of caters to white and then non-white as opposed to white and then the diversity is BIPOC. So I've always had that. I gravitate towards Storm in the X-Men. I gravitate towards Spider-Man partially because he wore a mask, so I could imagine that even though I know what Peter Parker looked like, that isn't necessarily what he always does. So when Spider-Verse became a thing and you saw all these various iterations, and I also discovered Spider-Punk and Spider-Man India, I was thrilled. But I think I've also found like parts of myself explored in other characters. So I'm also queer, and that was something that made me a minority back home. Um, so when characters were finally allowed to be queer after the comics code was scrapped, it was lovely kind of connecting with characters like Wiccan, who I read as having POC heritage because he does have Romani roots. And he is raised in a Jewish household, so he is a minority. But like I find myself always being kind of pulled towards people on the outskirts. Um, and that's what the X-Men does so well, is it doesn't try and make everyone fit into kind of a cookie cutter mold. What I loved is that it was about celebrating the fact that there's a team that had all these different powers and all these different personalities. And I think what Patrick said about the metaphor working really well. I mean, I read the X-Men as queer. I read Bobby as queer way before he came out, and I was thrilled when he did. But it's kind of those aspects where sci-fi gave me so much of that, where I was able to read myself into stories where I might not necessarily have existed in the first place. And it was important for me as a fan to take up that space, I think. And that's what I kind of love about the community now, is it as a fandom, while nerddom and while geekdom generally still has a lot of issues with racism, fandoms for things like the X-Men really encourage taking up space. And I love that about it.
Of that. Jeremy?
Hi, y'all. I am Jeremy. I am I was born and raised in Trinidad. I've been in the U.S. I've been living in Nashville since 1994. And being a Black man who was born and raised in a country where most people looked like me, living in America has been interesting. I have this sort of dual perspective. When I was growing up, my president was Black, and my vice and my prime minister was Black, and my preachers were Black, and let's see, all my school teachers were Black from kindergarten all the way to high school, and so that idea, it's interesting because I can definitely being here, I can relate to the dissonance, the struggle that African Americans feel, but I have a sort of cushion, sort of blanket, because I know in a very real, very personal way that the narrative that has been put forth through the tradition of racism in America is actually a false narrative. But the problem is it's so loud and it's so big that it's very difficult to see around it. And I'm lucky, I'm blessed that being who I am, growing up where I grew up, that I can see the life for what it is. And it gives me an interesting perspective. One of the reasons I chose the university that I did is because it was a majority white university. But my high school, after I immigrated, was majority Black. And I was very sure that I didn't want to end up repeating some of the mistakes that I saw happening because of the ongoing pressure. There's a psychological terminology that's called minority stress. And people of color deal with minority stress all the time in a way that a lot of people don't realize on an everyday basis. But being born and raised in Trinidad, I am able to mitigate some of that minority stress because I know that the narrative is actually a lie. And so it gives me this sort of I guess shield, maybe the word. It gives me this shield, it gives me this cushion, this buffer, so I can have a different perspective. And when I got involved with the X-Men, it was actually through a very turbulent time. My mom had finally gotten tired of my father, and they were in the middle of a divorce that separated and all those sorts of things. And she left, but she wasn't ready to take us with her, so we stayed with him for a little while, and then his deadbeatness came to the top, and we ended up staying with our aunts and all of the good stuff. So there was a lot of turmoil when I was my 12th year, and my cousin introduced me to, he gave me Uncanny X-Men 233, and it blew my mind.
Go on, go on.
Yes, it blew my mind.
Oh my
That first splash page where the X-Men are back to back and the Brood is hanging over them. I lost my breath. I lost my breath. And Storm was right there in the center, and you could see from that body language said, "I am not going down." And it just, something about her in the dance said, "I am not going down," and it bolstered me. You know, that all the turmoil that was going on in my life at that time, that image said, "You are going to push through this." And that was the moment I I became immediately infatuated with Storm. And by the end of 233, I was 140% in love. It was, and it's been Storm ever since. Because she centered me, you know, and it was, and that first splash page, she didn't say anything. It was just her body language, just her standing back to back in front of her team, leading her team, and Dazzler saying, "Are we in trouble, guys?" And Storm didn't answer. She just faced it. And that's why since then, I have never gone a single year without checking in with the X-Men, literally. And then, and then when I went to college, that's when the whole chat board and everything was really getting a go. And I found this international group of people who were in love with the X-Men. Here I am, a freshman in college, and I'm talking to astrophysicists, I'm talking to chemical engineers, I'm talking to nurses, I'm talking to doctors, I'm talking to other college students, I'm talking to high school students, and we're all head over heels in love with the X-Men. And
yes.
I was like, this is amazing. This is amazing. And it's funny, that time frame, freshman year in college, is when my love for the X-Men went from sort of cerebral and from the heart. It went all the way down to my roots and my molecules and everything. You know, and it's like I don't think I will ever stop reading the X-Men. I know there have been periods where the art is horrible, where the writing is cringeworthy and all those sorts of stuff, but I'm in. I am so in. But anyway, that's me.
Go off, Queen. She said 233.
Well, speaking of Storm, I think kind of my first question is probably Storm might come up quite a bit, but you don't have to choose or say an X-Man, but I wanted to ask everyone, who is the first BIPOC character, superhero in comics, movies that resonated with you? And we're not going to go in any sort of order right now, just whoever wants to start, raise your hand, and then everybody else can raise your hand and answer next. And any of these questions that we have, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, especially if your answer is Storm and 8 other people have said that. But I'll go ahead and start with Jeremy again, because he raised his hand first. So Jeremy, who was your first BIPOC character that resonated with you?
Definitely was Storm, the story I just said. And the funny thing, it wasn't because she is BIPOC. It was because that body language really spoke to me. And as we went through 233, she rallied more than once. She helped the team, she led, and she has this empathy and strength at the same time. She's one of my Jejuisms, one of my the things, the little sayings that I have to describe me in a succinct way is Jejuism number 1. I'm a nice guy, but I'm not that fucking nice. And and Storm's the same way. Storm is everything you want in a woman, in a mother, everything. But don't mistake her nurturing nature, her kindness, her sweetness, her empathy. She is no pushover. And if you need an ass whooping, she will provide you that because you need it. And then after she's whooped your ass, she will bring you a cup of hot cocoa and a blanket. And I love that about her. And you know, at that age, I wasn't able to really articulate that, but Claremont got that across to me in 233. And because of that, that's why I love her. And that's why she is the one that resonates so much with me. She actually reminds me of my aunt. Aunt Annette, my favorite aunt. She's the same way. So I'll stop there because I could go on. I could go on for another 45 minutes.
I'm gonna go to Caribou and then Raika and then Brashan.
Okay, so are we allowed to kind of like talk? Can I just say a little something about Storm also? Just,
Sure.
Sure. Okay, cool. So I actually had a really hard time accepting Storm for a while because of what I like to call the omniracial Storm paradigm. And I know that some of you remember, I can't remember exactly which issue it is, but it's like Storm is laying there on an operating table. I think this is in Genosha. And one of the Genosian doctors is just going on and on about, and this is like really pivotal for me when I was reading this, on and on about like how she's the perfect human because she has black skin, but she has Caucasian features and she has Asian eyes. And but this is like literal Claremont, like, you know, like a kind of dog whistling here about like the imperative. You remember this? Okay. All right, so I had a hard time digesting Storm almost because of that, because I saw a lot of this omniracial Storm paradigm and how like there are so many things that I think authors foisted onto Storm, and even though Claremont loved the character, he kind of did himself because there's no other way to tell a lot of these like racial, ethnic, you know, like they made her literally every aspect of everything sometimes. So in order for her to be like, you know, the spokesperson or like the lightning bolt of all these issues. And so I kind of shunned Storm really for a while. And to be totally honest, I mean, if we're talking about like, I mean, outside of X-Men, it was hard to say. I think my first like BIPOC character that I really got into was maybe an anime character or something like that. You know what I mean? Just a Japanese character or whatever the case may be. And I think it might have been like Ryoko or something from Tenchi Muyo. But what the character that really got me was it's kind of a tie between Tempo and Thrinity. I loved Thrinity so much. Like, I don't know what it was. Like, I loved Thrinity so much. When she showed up, like, I loved her from when they first showed her. Like, I like that she was this, like, you know, homeless, crazy, schizophrenic person that, like, the cops found and, like, tried to rescue, and the X-Men would, like, continually try to rescue. And then Thrinity was just, like, when she finally got, like, a little bit of clarity in her, she was like, I'm gonna go with Sinister because I want to know things. I want to know things and I want to know how things go. And I think I can play this for myself. And that's what I loved about it. And then when she showed up in X-Men and she was like, you know, she was like such a city girl. She was just trying to like always get money all the time. But Nate was continually trying to show her how to be like a good person. And she was just like, nah, get this money, B. You know, like I loved that. I loved it. I love how she tried to hustle Sinister. I love how she tried to hustle X-Man. I love how she tried to hustle all these people. And she still, I mean, she got knocked up. She had like a rough time. I love that city girl so hard. I love Thrinity. She's like one of my favorites. I hope she has a big comeback somehow. I mean, I hope like her, I mean, and I love Tempo, but that's an entirely different conversation that we can get into. But like, yeah, I'm gonna go with Thrinity. Thrinity was my B, and she really got me to like be excited for when they would show more like Black characters. Like I love, I mean, I'm an obscurist, so like I love, so naturally X-Men is for me. But like her and characters like Bedlam and everything, like these obscure characters that really fit in like some of the avenues not always taken with Black characters, you know what I mean? Because like Storm is so regal and Storm is so pretty and she's a queen, blah blah blah. But then you had scamming ass Thrinity who was just like trying to get whatever she could out of life. That's why I love her. So that's my vote. But, yeah.
Aika.
So for me, I started off with horror. I was born into it. My mother used to watch horror movies when she was pregnant with me. So, I was into things like Hellraiser at an age when I shouldn't have been watching Hellraiser. So my first favorite actual comic book character, like a comic book that I purchased, wasn't BIPOC. It was Wonder Woman, because I learned about her bondage before I'd actually seen Wonder Woman as everybody else knew her. It took a while before I realized that Wonder Woman on TV, Linda Carter, was the same Wonder Woman that I was reading about, because they were so different. So when it comes to someone that was like me, it actually wasn't Storm. Thereafter, it turned out, it was so much later, it turned out being Blade, because it was vampires. So I got to combine those two worlds, comic world and horror world, and I didn't know that was possible, even though I totally read Creepshow, so I don't know how I missed that. But it was Blade for me. He was the one that did it for me. It was vampire hunting, it was horror. I just really loved Blade. Like some people have said already, with Storm, I just didn't identify with her, mostly because my first exposure to her was the cartoon. Now, I don't know how many cartoons there've been, but it's the one where she wore all white and she sounded like this, 40, 50-year-old woman, you know what I mean? So being, I don't know how old I was, 3, 5, I have no idea. But being little, that sounded like that was my mom or my auntie, like the voice, you know what I mean? And I don't want to make anyone feel bad. I don't want to sound ageist, but she sounded so much older that as a little kid, I just couldn't, there was no connection for me. The skin color wasn't the issue. Back then I had the same color. The hair, I thought the hair was white because she was old, because I didn't know her story. But, and then I had that issue. I don't know if anybody's seen Stranger Things. I hope this isn't a spoiler, but there was an episode where it was Halloween and they went as the Ghostbusters. And the one Black kid on the show, oh, you have to be Winston. Why do I have to be Winston? I laughed for days behind that part, because it was, I just wanted to hang out with my cousins, and they were all males, the ones that were nearest me. And they would say like, okay, you're going to be Storm. It was just automatic. Okay, so you're Storm. And we're, I get to be Beast, and I'm like, well, I want to be something. I want to be Rogue. I like Rogue. She doesn't like nobody touching her. That's my favorite. Like, I always chose violence growing up. So Rogue really, spoke to me, and she had the big fluffy hair and everything. And she had the Southern accent. So I wanted to be Rogue when we would play X-Men, but no, you have to be Storm. Why? She's this old woman, I thought, So for me, it was always Blade. It wasn't until Halle Berry played her in X-Men, and of course I was a diehard Halle Berry fan at the time. So anything she did, I was into. And then I thought, why did that character's eyes just change color like that? Like, oh, does she control the weather? Oh my God, who is this person? I was brand new. And then I realized, oh, her hair is white, not because she's old. So then I felt really dumb. So then, I wanted to go read the comics. I wanted to go catch up, and I wanted to know everything there was to know about Storm. I didn't know that when it comes to comics, that if you're trying to find someone's origin story, you better find a compendium, you better find a book about them, because, it's collector's items. And, I just want to read it. No, you can't touch it. You can't breathe on it. I'm like, but why can't I read it? No, you're not you can't touch it. You can't touch it. You can just look at the cover. And I thought, oh, well, that's so stupid. Why can't, Google was still kind of fresh when the movie came out, so Google wasn't really all that yet. And so I had to go to the library and get a book and read about the X-Men that way, because I didn't know. And so because of that, I actually didn't really start buying comics until Wonder Woman came out the past, I don't know, maybe a couple years when they relaunched it. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, let me get it now, because I'm not gonna have to deal with these people that say I can't touch their comics. I'm gonna touch it all over. I'm gonna open it and bend it and everything. Deal with it. So yeah. So long story short, my favorite one was Blade, because he was horror to me, and I was already reading like Creepshow. And then I didn't the Storm again until Halle Berry, and I wanted to know everything about Storm after that. To me, she seems cool. I've heard a lot of complaints about the character. Now that I've read about it, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I see. But I didn't care. She controlled the weather. She had a little bit of an attitude problem. The haircut was cute. I liked it. I mean, I really liked it, because that was my first exposure. Now I'm really unnecessarily critical. Like, can we do that a little different? You know, watching the movie Black Panther, I really wanted. I mean, the moment we saw Angela Bassett in that scene where they were trying to save T'Challa, and she had the, you know, her locks on her coat, my mind went straight to now that Storm. That Storm. That should have been Storm.
Right.
We're screwed now because it's already Halle Berry. So yeah. So yeah.
I love that you thought she was an old lady.
I did. And I feel really bad because I'm sure the voice actor is a wonderful person, but it just, you know, I was a kid. I didn't know any better.
Rasan.
So what's funny about that is you are not alone. So I met Storm first, but she's not the person that impacted me the most first. I'm gonna get to that. So I met Storm back in, I guess, the 80s, the mid 80s. One of my parents bought me this comic book at the supermarket, and it was like an anti-smoking comic book, like a comic book that said smoking was bad. And it started like Storm, Spider-Man, I think Captain America, and a few other people. And I was an asthmatic kid, and I'm allergic to cigarette smoke. So having this like Black woman say smoking was bad, I'm like, this is awesome. And I thought, okay, she has white hair. I was young enough to not realize you could have like white hair and gray hairs and like not necessarily be old. And granted, I'm in my 40s, so you might think that's old, but I was like, she doesn't look old, but she has this like white hair. What's up with that? But I found her intriguing. But then I didn't read comics again until a few years later. And I remember reading the New Mutants, and the character that jumped out to me immediately was Sunspot, Roberto da Costa. And this was before I knew what an Afro-Latino was. He was just a Black kid to me. Like, and I remember liking his cocky ass attitude. I remember like liking the fact that he was this cocky kid. You know, a lot of times you see like a Black character or any character that's non-white, like they're very, if they're not a villain, they're like a saint. You know, you can't write this person with an attitude, or either write them with a bad attitude, or you can't write them with an attitude at all because you don't want to like vilify them. And I like this kid was very cocky. He was very self-assured. He was rich. And I remember, you know, us talking earlier about how characters like Monet, where you can have a tan, you can be different skin colors throughout the year. That's true. However, before I knew Bobby's whole origin, I just saw he was a Black kid. Yeah, he had straighter hair than me, but he had like Black features. He was dark skinned. So I think that resonated with me a lot, and his attitude, and he was like closer in age to me because he wasn't an adult yet. He was still like a teenager, and I was like a preteen. And over time, seeing that character, I'm glad that character's been brought back. Yes, skin color can change throughout the year, but that character underwent such a whitewashing in both media and in comics. Yeah. I'm glad to see in the current run of Reign of X now that they've gotten back to at least drawing him more how he looked in New Mutants. What was that New Mutants first book called? The one with, you know, when we first introduced New Mutants, and you see his origin story about anti-Blackness. I'm glad that they've gotten back to drawing him looking more like that, like his true self. And I'm glad that he still kept his cocky attitude, but he's kind of matured a bit where he actually understands that, you know, like the world doesn't revolve around me, but I'm still self-confident.
Carl, go ahead.
For me, it was you know, it was tough because I didn't really, you know, the people of color that were on, you know, the comics were not me. You know, there were other people of color that I admired, but they weren't me. And you know, the closest one was, you know, Sunfire, but I didn't really know about Sunfire because that wasn't my entry into the X-Men. So my entry into the X-Men was like Jubilee, and
yes.
I couldn't stand her. So I was like, you know, like it's not the kind of Asian I want to be, you know, like, and so, you know, it was Psylocke, which was really crazy because I loved Psylocke as, you know, British Psylocke with the armor, and then I remember seeing her become, you know, Quanon Psylocke, you know, and I was like,
what?
I'm supposed to like her, but it's kind of problematic. But the one really that I really like attached myself to is Karma. Because she is, you know, she's experienced so much trauma, and she comes in, you know, like as a villainy, you know, kind of person into that world, and you know, but she she kind of has a, she's kind of like the useless, member of the New Mutants in a sense, in that she's not the fighter, but she can cause other people to fight. But then when she's, doing her mutant power, she's just standing there. But I like that vulnerability. I really understood, not being that person that can defend yourself, but you use your mind and your wits about you to defend yourself, because that was the kid that I was, when I was younger. I couldn't fight. I was a skinny kid, in the Bronx. Like, I had to use my wits. I had to, like, talk to people. I had to, share my homework, or, whatever it is that I had to do, to get out of being bullied or fighting, was what I had to do. And so she really, stood out to me in that way. And it kind of bothers me that there's been so many amazing Filipino artists, especially in the realm of X-Men, like Will Portacio and all of these people that are legendary, but they've never written a Filipino mutant.
So that actually, before Wills wanted to actually introduce a Filipino mutant, in Marvel, as somebody correct me if I'm wrong, Marvel mandated that he make Bishop instead. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, like it, we're not, we're not marketable, I guess. I don't know.
Wasn't Bishop supposed to be Filipino?
Was, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the colors are like the flag a little bit, like his
He
colors.
was, and Marvel made somebody in Marvel made him make Philip not Filipino.
Like there was an intention, and then they went back and retconned it, and now it's interesting. Bishop is such an interesting character because first, he's from the future, so he has a perspective that's way different from that of Storm, for example, or Sync, or even Bobby DaCosta. But now it's like, okay, well, actually he's Aboriginal. Actually, we've got him in World of Black Superheroes. Like, he's always claimed as being a Black character. And I'm like, here's the thing. One of my best friends, I had no idea about this. And I'm sorry, I know I'm going off on a tangent here. But when I met her, she was, we always get mistaken for each other, which is hysterical because I'm Hispanic and she is Asian. But we're both these small, short women with, straight Black hair. So I guess that means we look alike. But she recently, she had told me that her mom is Filipino and her dad is Japanese. Well, then the other day we were having a random discussion, and she mentioned that she's Puerto Rican. And I said, what did you just say? And it turns out that she is Puerto Rican and she is Filipino and she's Japanese. And her children, their father is Black. So, like, my headcanon is that Bishop is like one of those kids. Like, he's got primarily Aboriginal parents, but humans love to have sex, and we have sex with everybody. So he's probably got a little some maybe grandparents, his great grandparents. He's looked at Monet and said, "Hey, Mom," and we're like, "What?"
Yes,
I'm just glad he got rid of the perm.
Yeah, so I think that's something that Marvel plays fast and loose, and I don't really know if it's a corporate decision or if it's just creators not talking to each other, or they want to just play the line like, let's have our cake and eat it too. But I think part of it is annoying as hell. Like, come on, just say the character is Black. Just say it. Just say that they're Black. But part of it is wonderful because we are in a new age where so many more people are mixed. They're mixing with other mixes, and we've got all of these kids. My kids are mixed race. My brother and my sister, they're mixed race, and so their kids are mixed race. And it's just like, in the future, everybody's kids are going to be like The Rock. The Rock's kids are like Puerto Rican and Samoan and Black and white. Like, what else? Like, there's like all these different things that he is. And what box do those kids check, right? So I kind of feel like Bishop is kind of supposed to be one of those types of characters where he's got all these different things that he is, but he knows that most of his heritage is Aboriginal, but he's just like, fuck it, I am what I am.
Everybody gonna be beige, girl. It's fine.
Right.
Ibs to Sam, you had raised your hand.
So I feel like there's been different parts of me that have kind of connected and resonated with different characters. So I remember, like I mentioned, Storm was the first BIPOC character I remember really seeing, but I didn't fully resonate with her. Then I resonated a little bit with Spider-Man India, but then something that really got on my nerves was how a lot of characters who were South Asian were kind of pigeonholed into being really exotic and super Indian and kind of pulling a lot from Hindu spirituality, which I was raised in a Muslim household, so I didn't connect with that. I connected a little bit with Dust because I was racialized as Muslim when I traveled abroad, but obviously not as a woman. So I think like I've had moments where I've connected, I've even connected a little bit with Hulkling kind of being an immigrant, but being a queer immigrant. But the first character I've really, really, really resonated with, and very recent, is probably Wiccan. I'm not reading Wiccan as the kind of really super waspy Wiccan that you see in the MCU in WandaVision, although I love him to bits there as well. For me, canonically, he has Romani heritage. For me, he has very distinct Romani heritage, and also because he's raised in a Jewish household, he is an ethnic minority. And the reason I connected with him was, one, he was a massive geek and he was unashamed about it. And he kind of was like, oh my God, I have powers of Scarlet Witch. What do I call myself? Wiccan. Like that would be me if I ever got superpowers. I would not be original. I just go, who do I look like? Whose powers do I get from the X-Men? That's the name I'm taking. But I also like the kind of unexpected ways that he continues to be drawn. Like he has he wears makeup, he has nail polish on, he was never the super buff member of the team, and admittedly they were teenagers, but he still seemed a lot leaner than the rest of them were. He struggled with mental health issues. One of my favorite things in King in Black, Wiccan and Hulkling is that he has chest hair, because a lot of South Asian people have chest hair. Like a lot of people of color have really visible chest hair from a young age. And it's just like, where are those details? And I feel like even though they might not necessarily be conscious decisions, I like that his different kind of evolutions in his costume and his portrayals have picked up on those aspects. I hope it gets more explicit. I hope it gets, kind of continued down that line, but that's really the character I've resonated with.
So I want to jump to a question that I wrestle with a lot. We have, especially with Marvel and especially with the X-Men specifically, we have a wide variety of BIPOC characters. We have a wide variety of characters that are questionable. Like, how are we going to put them in this box? Should we even put them in the box? But what do you all think about missed opportunities in comics where we could have something really great and then it doesn't go anywhere? Rasan?
So, we talk about how the X-Men specifically are this great allegory for marginalization, and I think at times I agree that sometimes you don't want to pigeonhole characters, but at the same time, you have these great allegories that like that are very relevant to where we are now in the world. And since we're talking about a character like Storm, there are so many intersections there. Like with a lot of the female characters who are characters of color, there are so many intersections between their race as homo superior, their constructed race as BIPOC, their gender, their sexuality. And a lot of times I feel like there is not a definitive line drawn between those two, because you can't tell me in the world of Krakoa, there's also not anti-Blackness or anti-Semitism or anti-Asian sentiment or homophobia. You can't tell me that. And I always don't like how the X Office doesn't draw those like hard lines like other titles like Black Panther does.
I think that's a really good point. I think that we know even within our own communities, we struggle with colorism. My cousin and I she would insult me all the time because she would say I was too dark. And I'm like, you're darker than me. What the fuck are you talking about? But she had like green eyes and brown hair, and she would kind of like try to make me feel bad. And I'm just looking at her like, bitch, please, what the fuck is wrong with you? And it really took a hit on my self-confidence because she was my older cousin and I looked up to her and, you know, I wanted to be like her, and for her to other me, and I'm like, your cousin, I'm the next grandchild. Like all these years later, I still think about it. I'm like, how fucking dare you? I don't talk to her because I'm not going to let that kind of toxicity in my life. But, you know, when you're 12 years old and you're looking at your 16-year-old cousin and they're doing this to you, you don't really understand some of the stuff that's going on socially and kind of just behind the scenes. But it's just really, you know, like why are we doing this to ourselves? So there has to be some of that on Krakoa. And, you know, we did get that moment of Fenris saying, oh man, we've been so good, we want to wreak some damage here. And I don't think that they've done enough to really do what you're saying. And I think that is an enormously missed opportunity that they should be developing and looking into.
Like Regina, going back to that, like you and I have talked about, for instance, Dr. Cecilia, who I love. Like you as a Latina, you and I have talked about how the Latinx construct, people see it as this whole big monolith. And Cecilia is a very distinct character. She is Black, she's Puerto Rican, she's from the South Bronx. Me growing up in New York, I went to high school with Boricuas from the South Bronx, and I know a lot of women like her. And, you know, like seeing that they're not diving into how she's a very different Latina than Amara Aquila, for instance.
Yeah, and that Amara is a whole different level of problematic. Like, I mean, and again, we do have, I mean, there are a lot of people in South America who are white. A lot of Germans came over, a lot of people, you know, they're in Brazil and Venezuela and, you know, all these places. And we don't like, you know, if you go to Latin America, they'll tell you, we are not racist here. First of all, that is the biggest load of bullshit that colonialism has ever exhibited on this side of the continent. Like, come on, please, don't get me started. But, you know, we could be doing so much more with those types of stories, and we don't. Caribou, I think you had something to say next.
So, completely agree. There's like, I also wonder about how that works in Krakoa, and I've also wondered about how that works with mutants as well, because like we're talking like the normalization of some like skin tones and skin types with people with, like, say you're a Morlock, right? And so Morlocks usually come in contact with a lot more variation of just like, you know, the mutant aspect, right? And so there has to be, I feel like within, say, the Morlock culture, like, oh, blue skins act so superior to like, you know, gray skins or whatever the case may be, like that kind of mentality, and it like goes across the diaspora. And so I wonder, like, does it become almost like the hyper focus of something as trivial as skin tone when in relation to the main othering, which is like your own mutant power, you know, to like the rest of the world. Anyhow, but so I am probably one of the most hardcore Dazzler fans you'll ever meet. And as we know, Dazzler started off conceptually as a Black woman. And I often go back and forth with, like, if she were to have like real representation, like in media, like would I want that character to be played by like a person of color? And it also makes me think of like popular, or not popular, but like some more noted racial swaps that have happened in the X-Men, not just with Psylocke, but I mean, we're talking about like, I thought it was pretty pivotal when they changed Locust from being a white girl to being like the most Black you could be. She had like Cocoa Puffs. That was pretty huge. And they never explained it. They never freaking explained it, you know? And like what that says about a period of time, what that says about like the direction they're like going in, why that was important to do that. You know, like why was it important to change Locust so Black? You know what I mean? Like it wasn't just like they just changed her color. They made sure to change Locust like as Black as you could, like, you know, get her to look. And so I think about that also with like, so I think about like how, you know, with the talk of the X-Men coming into becoming, you know, like getting a reboot or whatever the case may be, like, would there be characters that I'd be like, oh, you'd probably read maybe a little better as a person of color. Like when they changed Amara Magma from being, you know, to being black on the series, on the what was that? Wolverine and X-Men or the other one?
I think it was
X-Men
Evolution, I
Evolution, I
think.
think.
As X-Men Evolution. Right. You know, she ended up looking like Monet. And I was like, that's really interesting. Like why they decided to, I mean, it would change that, blah, 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 these like little opportunities. And like, you know, I often am like, I would be great to see a POC Dazzler, a BIPOC Dazzler, but at the same time, like that character has so much answering to do as a white woman, and she always gets taken to the fore as like, you know, these questions of what allyship is for being a white woman. She answers a lot of questions about like, you know, and she gets put to the test a lot of the times about like her whiteness. You know what I mean? Like Dazzler is interestingly a character that has to like answer for her whiteness a lot. And
Wait,
so
really?
I was, yes, girl.
What
Yeah.
storylines am
Oh
I
my
missing?
God.
Hold on.
No. I'm dead ass. Dead ass. And one example of this is when about appropriation, right? In Beauty and the Beast, Beast comes to her and he's all like about to tell her off and be like, look, you're acting a damn fool. You're getting exploited. I hope you know, by the way. And she's sitting there wearing a full Indian headdress and like Indian, like it was full appropriation. And he was like, look at you. You look like a freaking idiot. You know what I mean? He's like, you're ugly, Dazzler. You're ugly. You're exploiting your people, and they've got you dressing like a moron. Do you understand what this means? And she's like, but scars are pretty, Beast. And he's like, he takes her lipstick and drops it all over her face. And he's like, you're done. I'm done with you. You know what I mean? So yeah, Dazzler gets taken to, she always has to answer for her whiteness, like a lot. You know what I mean? And so like, that's why it's like, okay, well, the mutant metaphor and why I really feel like I connect with her. I mean, that goes to show how people can come into, you know, these fandoms, and like there's so little that I really connect with Dazzler on, except for the things that are super important, you know what I mean, like in her life, and like that mean a lot to her. But like demographically, I don't look like Dazzler, you know, but like how is it that like I connect to her so hard, you know? And it's just like, is it because like I want these questions answered in a world where it doesn't seem like I get these answers from white women, you know what I mean? From whiteness, you know, where like directly Dazzler always has to answer for them. You know, she always has to like peer into the glass, like grow and be a big person. And she may not go on to be like the best person, but at least she got like she had the opportunity to like answer for fucking like race. So yeah.
Pat, do you want to go next?
Yes. What was I think I'm going back to the previous question, like the characters that I resonated with. And let's just be honest, like the state of Filipino representation in comics is kind of garbage. We have Wave, but I mean, the only way you would say she's Filipino is because the script keeps telling you, oh, by the way, she's Filipino. Thank you. Like, you're correct, because I wouldn't have known otherwise. So that was good that you mentioned that. So I guess I'll like take us to like more pop culture at large, because I think we're having like a very big Filipino moment, which is awesome. So like a couple of characters that I want to mention is, I don't know if y'all are like crazy ex-girlfriend fans. I mean, I am. But like Josh Chan is one of like such a cool Filipino character, because I appreciate how much of a slacker idiot he is. Because I think like there's this tendency of like when you see Asians on the screen, like they're super smart, they're super capable, they're super responsible, right? They're like they're the model minority. And now comes along this moron who's like kind of a funny idiot. And I just find that super, super refreshing and awesome. And he can sing, so that's also a plus.
Filipino stereotype.
What's that?
That's a Filipino stereotype. We can
That they can sing?
I cannot.
Oh, I cannot either. And another one that is kind of like I don't know if y'all play video games too, but I got into Cyberpunk 2077 for like 3 months where I did nothing else. And like one of the characters in there, like they don't say it in the game, so you actually have to like go to this art book that I got where the text finally tells you like, oh, by the way, this character is Filipino, so which was pretty cool. His name's like Kerry Uridine. He's like a punky rocker in the game, and he's supposed to be Filipino. Um, and so I was already kind of drawn into that character, and then you find out that, oh, he's actually kind of Filipino. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, I think we definitely need some more interesting Filipino characters in the comics because right now we got his wave, and I'm like, I'm just not wowed by this wave. It's like, I'm sorry.
Tried to try out for that reality TV show where you're a superhero at a Comic Con in New York because I just
What
wish
is
there was more
this?
Filipino Comic Cons.
What is this?
Yeah, like they would
What
pick
is
like a
that?
hero and then they would make a comic book
From you?
out of this hero. You don't remember this? This was like in like
No, but you're in New York. We're gonna link up because I don't know about
in
that.
like yeah in like the 2000s. But yeah, it's really tough in that way because I often see, you know, like I think about, you know, like the X-Men culture and Krakoa culture and how they want people to interact. And there are all these rules about interaction and rules of who gets to live and whatever and how they live. And then you also think about gay culture and kind of like how white gay culture is.
What?
You know, like at least
What?
pop gay culture.
What?
And I feel sometimes that Krakoa is trying to live on this like way of that as well. And I'm often like thinking about, you know, there's this team coming up, and I was like, what if the team was made out of mostly people of color? Because the Avengers did it. They had a mostly people of color team, you know, and Captain Marvel. You know, like why can't the X-Men do something like they exist? There's a ton of them. Not a ton of them, but you know, there's enough to make a couple of teams. You know, I just and you have these fantastic characters like Dr. Cecilia Reyes, amazing character, fantastic backstory. What do they make her do? Just be a doctor. Like she could be a doctor and do other things. You know, like why can't she be a major character? She was put in the front. Why can't she stay in the front? You know, like why can't she be a, you know, a pillar of X-Men rather than just, oh, somebody died. Here comes the Dr. Cecilia Reyes to talk about how they died. You know, like why can't she be, you know, like front and center so that we can talk about her story and how she arrived where she was versus just little tidbits of, you know, I think the purpose was to bring her in, refresh it, but then they put her aside. Like, where are these people?
We need more Marjorie
Where's her
Liu.
attitude? Where's her attitude? You remember her attitude when she was first introduced?
Mm-hmm. And her hesitancy. I love her hesitancy. She was like, no.
Yeah, she was all like, Storm, I'm gonna call you sister whether you like it or not. All right,
Yeah.
I was gonna bring that up. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
She was like, nah, girl.
Jeremy, any thoughts on the missed opportunities?
Yes. I think probably the biggest missed opportunity was Monet and Everett. They were good. It actually upsets me. It makes me mad because for so long we had Storm, and you all know I love Storm. Okay, Storm debuted in 1975, and then we didn't get another BIPOC character of any significance on a team, a mutant on a team, until Bishop showed up in 1991. 1975 to 1991. Okay.
Girl, they had Moses Magnum.
That's bad enough. That's bad enough. Then when we get Everett, okay? So like Everett is probably, I think he's the first African American man, I believe, in the X-Men. All the others are from other countries. Storm is African American. She was born in New York City, but she's always presented and talked about as if she's Kenyan. Mm-hmm. But she's not. She's African American. But they have emphasized her otherness so much that's a different story. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Anyway, so we meet Everett, and Everett isn't angry. He isn't all those other stereotypes. He's level-headed, he's kind, he's smart, all those sorts of things. You know, the very first time we meet, but the very first time we meet him, the very first visual we get of him is surrounded by cops with guns drawn.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing. But anyway, moving on. But the first time we get to see in the X-Men a couple, a BIPOC couple, get together, the first African-American man in the X-Men dies. What the hell?
It's because he's
What
Gen
the fuck
X's
is
Jean
that?
Grey. He's Gen X's Jean Grey. He is. He is.
I mean, seriously, that just blew my mind. At last, we waited for so long. They were the first BIPOC couple in the X-Men.
Actually,
and he died.
Wait, wouldn't you count Storm and Forge as the first BIPOC couple in the X-Men?
Oh my God, I forgot about Forge. I love that girl.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yes.
I forgot about Forge. You're right.
Right?
They didn't
How
last
dare we
either,
forget?
did they? But they didn't last either.
But they had like such an incredible story. I mean, Life Death is like one of the most iconic, if not like highly recommended reads and pulls. Forge got Storm together. Forge got her together.
Yeah. Yeah, I could say that.
We're gonna have to have this conversation another time because I got a lot to say about Ford and Storm.
But it's also an attraction to it's also an attraction to his intelligence and him being a very sensitive person rather than his power, because he's not the most powerful X-Man. He was somebody who was a supporting member who was super smart, and I really love that, like, this goddess is in love with this smart man. You know, like
maker, this guy. But
real quick, I'm gonna just let everybody know. Everybody raised their hands all at the same time, so I apologize that we haven't called on some of you. I'm gonna go to It's to Sam real quick, and then we're gonna start with Raika and Jonathan on our next question. So It's to Sam, what did you want to say real quick?
I think something I want to call it. I don't want to call this a missed opportunity just yet, because I think this is one of the exciting things about kind of the new status quo with Krakoa. But when I was reading House of X, Powers of X the first time, something that struck me was that they were talking about creating mutant embassies in every country. And as a person of color living in the UK who is an immigrant from Asia, and with all the colonial baggage that comes with it, I sometimes wish that there was more of an international outlook with BIPOC characters as well. And I didn't mind it so much when the X-Men as a team were based in the US. But now that they're based on an island that says that they have embassies everywhere in the world, I don't just want to see more people of color. I want to see like what a black American encountering a black Japanese woman encountering a black person from the Caribbean, from Africa. Like, experiences change not just according to race, but also where that race is situated in a country. And since the X-Men specifically state that that's part of how the embassies work, I want more members from other countries, and I want them to be BIPOCs. It's not just going to be like, oh, introduce a bunch of white Europeans. I don't want that either. But like, let's bring in that diversity, because my experience of being a South Asian is very different to someone who's born and bred South Asian, but in the UK, compared to someone who's born and bred South Asian in the States. We need those differences as well. And with so many possibilities of having different X titles, why not do that? why not kind of add that layer as well? Because I'd love to see that.
Yeah, to kind of go off of that and with missed opportunities to go with what Jeremy said, we've had characters like Monet and Sink, and when it comes to Black men in comics, they've all always been from other countries or they've been African. We never really had that, at least with X-Men characters. We've never had that American Black man story. And then like with Monet, she's from every European country you can name. And we still just kind of treat her as kind of like a white woman with her story and not treat her like a Black European woman. But now that we've talked about some missed opportunities, I would like to move on to what are things that you kind of hope to see in comics or movies or pop culture. And I wanted to start with Raika. What's something that you would like to see in the future?
Indigenous people. We don't exist in comics. I had to go read Scalped just to see us in comic form. I didn't even know Slipknot existed until that Suicide Squad. I have a lot of thoughts about that movie, but Adam Beach is a huge actor in our community, huge activist in our community, and for him to basically say a couple things and then that's it, he's gone. Sorry, spoiler alert, but that was really frustrating because I'm gonna tell you, I didn't go to see anybody but him. I've seen the Joker so many times. He's got to be my favorite character. That's white. I don't know how else to say it. But I was really upset. I unnecessarily upset because I wanted to see him. He mattered in my community, and other people didn't quite understand how monumental that was for us to know that there was going to be a Native character on TV. And so in the movies, and so when we've all been reading Scalped, and then we look up, Slipknot, and we realize, wow, we really have no representation. We got names like Warpath, and it's like we're stereotypical Indians again, headdresses and everything else. But you know what? We're just as diverse as the rest of the planet, and we don't exist. We really don't exist. Even something as, crappy as, what's that, Planet America or Captain America, whatever that was, the one with the kids would go save the planet or whatever. That really bad. You know the one I'm talking about? Yeah.
The green guy.
No Native American character in that. So but with the X-Men, I guess I didn't really hold them to task. I learned a lot listening to what everybody had to say. But there's just so many different kinds of mutants. It just never really registered how much is still missing. So for me, it was, I liked the Blade character because he was just a regular Black guy that I could point at in my family. I really like that. He was just a regular old Black dude that I could point at in my family. And what I want to see in the future, what I hope to see is that with the Black female characters, and I want to see that with Indigenous characters. We don't always have to have feathers. I know that that's the defining factor, but we don't need feathers and buckskin and headdresses, and we don't have to have visions all the time. We don't need names like Warpath and stuff like that. Like, I just want to see us included and be part of society as we are now. I would really love to see that. And then I know it's mostly a Marvel, X-Men thing, but Walking Dead is one of those ones I was able to follow from the beginning as far as comic books, not just the show. And I was really annoyed with how Michonne became the mammy. And I don't remember what season that was on the TV show, but she was freaking awesome. She was dark skinned. She had a horrible dread wig, but she had locks. And that sword, there's something about a sword. I don't care who you are. Something about a sword. Well, then when you consider the fact that my favorite was Blade. So yeah, it was something about the sword. And then she just became the mammy. And then there was, everyone was shipping Roshone. And it never, didn't happen until the end. And then of course he's killed off. And there was just this track record of, the Black men had to die in Walking Dead. They just have to all die. And that's not necessarily how it was written. So I just want to see changes in that. I don't want to see the Black men constantly dying. I don't want to see the Black women to not have relationships. And when they do, they can't be with their own men, and I want to see more Indigenous representation. That's not the stereotypical Indian. I mean, some of these stories I'm saying to myself, how did you have this story based in America and you missed the Indians completely? I only just discovered Fear the Walking Dead. I know that's not technically comic, but I just discovered it. And so I never bothered to watch it because at that point I was so upset with the Walking Dead comic and TV show that you're telling me you went through all the South and you didn't encounter one Indian. not one. You went right through Choctaw territory, Chickasaw territory, my people, and you didn't encounter us once. And the person who's surviving the apocalypse so far is a redneck named Daryl, like an imaginary character that wasn't even in the comics. But everything he did, it's like they created the Indian in a white man, and that really upset me. You know, I mean, come on, let's think about it. The bow and arrow, he lives off the land. I mean, come on. You couldn't have just got an Indian to do that. You had to get the white guy to make it acceptable to everyone to have the Indian without the Indian. That's what it felt like to me. It's like we weren't enough. You had to make us white to have us in The Walking Dead. And so then I finally just, I don't know, I got bored. I needed some zombies or something. And I finally watched The Walking Dead, and there's this whole season on the res, and I just kept saying, kill them all. Like, it was really bad. I went through something. I just wanted all the Indians to just not trust anybody. And of course, you know, it was, yeah, let's trust the white people. We're all gonna live as one in the Rainbow Coalition. And I'm thinking to myself, that's probably not how it would have happened in a zombie apocalypse. So it's like we really needed some native writers for that season, because although they nailed it, I'll give them so much credit. They did nail it. We totally needed just a little bit more realistic from our perspective, how that would have gone. They wouldn't have trusted any other white women than that group, especially after, you know, the fight over the water, and, you know, it would have been a lot more volatile. And I think people see us as this docile, passive people still. You know, we have the same issues as, you know, Filipinos, you know, Africans. I mean, you name it, anybody on the planet, we pretty much have the same personalities, because everybody's human and we're all capable of all those emotions. But that's not how they write us. That's not how they draw us. We're all butterscotch, long, straight hair. And that's not the indigenous community. I mean, you've got Central American indigenous people that are totally different from, you know, Iroquois, for example. And that's just not represented. Everybody's suddenly a Northern Plains Indian all of a sudden. Everybody's the same color, same build, and it's usually male. It's usually not an indigenous female. And what better superhero than to have someone that's championing to fighting for, you know, MMIW. I mean, you need a superhero. That's where you would need a superhero. I mean, that story kind of writes itself. Indigenous women are disappearing. No one's, you know, looking for them. That's a perfect opportunity for an indigenous female superhero, in my opinion. So, you know, long story short, I want to see more, you know, female indigenous representation, more diverse indigenous representation, more indigenous writers. And I would like to see, you know, Black female characters be happy with, you know, Black love exists. You know, when you're a kid, I grew up believing that Black men didn't like Black women. And then I found out through the census that we just took that that's actually not true, that most Black men are actually with Black women. I had no idea, because that's what I see. It's like the Black male is considered too aggressive unless you give him a non-Black woman. The Black woman is considered too angry and too aggressive unless you give her a non-Black man. It's like we have to be paired up with someone other to be acceptable into the general society as far as, you know, the comic and sci-fi world. So I just would like to, you know, have something a little bit more of an accurate representation of what's really out there. And I feel like we're not going to get that unless we're the ones writing. So I really want to see a lot more of us writing too.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
Jonathan.
He's chewing.
I was chewing bacon. Sorry. What I hope for the future, one, when it comes to the X-Men, definitely I want more BIPOC, but can we not make every freaking character that is Black come from Wakanda? Can I get a brother from Brooklyn or from Louisiana or from, you know, a kid from DC, you know, or, you know, some kid who grew up in Gainesville, Florida? Not everybody had to come from freaking Wakanda. I'm kind of sick of them using that as a crutch for every Black character that they create as of late. I
think you had an amazing idea. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. When you said Louisiana, could you, I mean, seriously, with the way the X-Men are, the things, places you could go with that, you know?
For me, for years, and I think I said this in the last podcast that we did. Whenever I read Rogue, in my head, Rogue is like this biracial, light-skinned sister from Mississippi. You know, she got some curves on a Rogue.
I thought she was Creole. Somebody had to tell me she was
right.
Wait, did you guys hear actually that? Did you guys hear the rumor that supposedly the Captain Marvel 2 villain might be Rogue, the black woman they cast. Did you hear that?
I've heard that rumor. I'm hoping
They
it's
cast the
true.
black woman as the villain, but they haven't announced who she is, and people are speculating she may be Rogue.
I'm fingers crossed.
That sounds good.
I would live.
Oh,
They can take all my money.
I would
Right.
live. Yeah.
They can take all my money.
Oh my god.
As far as other genres and things that I definitely like to see. I'm a big sci-fi geek. That's where my heart is. I tell my friends all the time, if you're gonna come over to my house and watch a movie, if it ain't got something blowing up or a monster chasing you, leave me alone. It's not gonna hold my attention, and I'd like to see some more stories of, I like, I know a lot of people didn't like the movie, but I liked Attack the Block. Here it was, this, aliens drop down in the middle of the hood, and these kids are like, here are these black kids, doing their damn thing and slaying aliens. I want to see more of that. What was it? Netflix just had Vampires in Queens, Vampires in the Bronx. I want to see more of that. I want to see our stories. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm pretty sure that the aliens didn't just come to the suburbs. I'm pretty sure the vampires didn't just attack there. Where are our stories? What happened with us? What was going on? I'm like, I was at my grandmama's house, and then a whole alien spaceship landed. Me and the boys got our guns. We went. We handled some business. That's what I mean. I want to see that. I want to see more. I want to see more Black love. Honestly, I want to see that too. I want to see more of, positive, images of it. It doesn't all have to be Storm and T'Challa. Yes. Yay. I didn't believe them when they started that mess. No. How you gonna pull that out of no damn where? I'm like, please, y'all retcon the hell out of that. I didn't believe that was a forced marriage in the middle of a war, and y'all were trying to sell some comics. Wasn't nobody even thinking about Black Panther. Y'all, let's put him with the most high profile Black woman we got. Basically is what happened. True. I didn't buy it. I still don't buy it. And they've worked a little bit to try to make it believable. But honestly, I'm like, Aurora, seriously, girl.
Yeah.
Seriously. And he do her dirt every damn every damn he plays her freaking dirty, and they have her run right back to that is not believable. I am pretty sure Storm will be like, okay, we could.
We have healthy love. Can't Storm
He her to the Avengers.
Like, is that really the woman you
can't have me? Here's my wife.
Right. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. That's not who she is. She's not that in love with that man.
Nobody
running out like that.
Namor.
No. It ain't that good. It ain't that good, T'Challa. It ain't that good. And ain't nobody thought about you until that movie came out. Anyways.
Read.
True.
And it's the honest goodness truth. I mean, he wasn't that popular of a character until they really started pushing him forward. That marriage to Storm really brought him to the forefront. That's the honest to goodness truth. Black Panther was a second thought to a lot of people.
Yes.
I'm grateful that he is now, and I'm grateful that my niece and nephews have a character that they can look up to. But as a comic book fan, I'm just like, that's some bullshit.
Yeah. Agreed.
We want something
that's some bullshit. To jump on what you were saying earlier about, because I really wanted to talk on sync. When we were talking about characters that we could really relate to, Generation X came out when I'm a product of Generation X. Generation X came out when I was in high school. And Sync was that character for me. It was like, oh my God, this is me. This is me. This is a kid who grew up and, he had both of his parents and he was a good kid and he was doing well in school. And the moment his mutant powers manifested, and he screamed and all the windows were block shattered, police show up at his front door with guns drawn.
Yep.
I felt that in my bones reading that. I felt that in my bones reading that. And then the way they did him so freaking dirty in that last volume and towards the end of Generations, when they killed my brother off panel.
Right?
Killed my brother off panel, gave us some bullshit explanation. So he literally has the mutant ability to adapt any mutant ability next to him. You mean to tell me when that explosion was going off that he couldn't siphon any of M's invulnerability?
Didn't that happen on some TV show? I think it was Heroes or something like that. There was a
Yes.
big controversy about it, and it was like, wait, he's bulletproof or something. I mean, I need answers.
Or
This is
even-
a sci-fi show. You can't just do
I
that
will
because we asked
Yeah.
you to.
And then on top of that, you let that boy stay dead for 20 plus something
20
odd
years.
years. This character is there for 20 something. Y'all brought some of the most boo the fool ass characters back that didn't nobody want to see. My baby was dead for 20 something years, and then you bring him back and immediately throw him in the vault.
You know what's funny about the vault? What's funny about the vault is the same way they killed Sink off, like unrealistically, they paired him with Darwin, who in First Class was killed off unrealistically, because Darwin has the power to like not die.
Thank you.
He's a character that's killed off in
Literal
First Class.
evolution is, yeah.
Literally, that is his power. That is literally his power, is to not die. I was like, this is some bullshit. This is some bullshit. You know, and then as far as Latino characters, Skin was another one of those characters that like I freaking love. They brought Skin back to life just for that one little issue in House of X and Power, whatever it was, just to show him and Sing buddied up. Hey, and then off he goes. You mean to tell me that the rest of Generation X haven't gotten together and been like, oh my God, we're so happy that you're back. What, some bonding, something going on? We don't get to see that. And it pisses me the hell off. We're a second thought.
Well, that's because they always do Gen X dirty, boy.
We are a second thought. I'm shout out to my homeboy Maggot for having an appearance this past week. I love Maggot. A lot of people don't like him. I love Maggot. And here's my thing with Maggot. If Maggot had been created during if he had been created during the Morrison era and released with that other bunch of kooky ass characters, he would be getting the same damn love. Maggot showed up at the end of the 90s. The X-Men were getting really weird. We didn't really know what was going on. They were just floating, trying to figure something out after that whole onslaught bullshit. They didn't know what was really happening. And here you get Maggot, you get Cecilia Reyes, and you get Meryl. Three of the most, how the hell are these people gonna like relate with the X-Men? I felt that. I was digging, I was down with them. I like the changes that they made to Maggot. Because originally he was this big blue guy, and then that story with Magneto, and like, here he is, this starving kid, and his mutant powers develop, and it's basically something to make him survive. That was beautiful. I thought that was beautiful. Yeah. That was beautiful. Was it kind of gross? Yeah, but it was still beautiful. I love his attitude in the book.
Same.
I love his attitude in the book. I love that there was I love that he was a South African character. That was different. We hadn't had that. You know,
he has the best style.
He does.
His style's amazing.
There was so much about it. There was so much about this character that I absolutely loved, and then he gets just brushed under the rug he send him off to Neverland. He dies and gives away one of his slugs. And I mean, just anyways, that's my boy, and I love him so much, and I get a little bit about
it's easy
baby.
But it's okay, Jonathan.
But you know, I got some deep feelings towards the character, and I just think that if writers actually took them seriously, Cecilia Reyes, amazing freaking character. She should not just be sitting in a freaking lab somewhere. You know, she was a badass. I love the flirtation she had with Beast and the flirtation she had with Nightcrawler. I love that little bit of attitude. I love that she was like, I'm really not about y'all right now. I'm gonna open my practice out in Salem Center, and if y'all need me, just holla. I love that about her, you know? Where's more of her brother? The interactions with her brother. What's going on with that there? I'd love to see more of that. Sunspot. I love that he is definitely back to being more of his Afrocentric self, and that is a major part of his character. But I do love that he's a smartass and a badass. Monet, when we talk about there's a lot I didn't get a chance to talk about. Sorry, y'all. So I'm going all in. We were talking about missed opportunities. When Monet was introduced and her autism, there was so much that they could have done with that story. And then it got all kind of weird with the twins and penance and all this. Just what the was that? Like, she could have just, how about y'all just do this? She's autistic and she's super cool and she has these moments of pure brilliance, and then she shuts down. And why not it just be that?
I still
I
think
thought that
of
was
her
I
as
thought
an
that,
autistic
I
character.
thought that would have been a beautiful story, and that would have been a beautiful story for kids. One, kids on the spectrum would have been a beautiful story for them, and especially kids of color on the spectrum would have been beautiful for them because they get representation. And I'm a little passionate about that because my mom works with special needs children. I think that's really super important. Okay, that's it. I'm good. Thanks.
I think I'm just gonna jump on that because I think something else that would be amazing. And by the way, if like anyone at like Marvel HQ listens to these podcasts, can you just maybe hire us? Like, thanks. Because we talk about diverse stories, you know, we can do that. But like if I'm like one of the things that bothers me a lot, and this is more on the visual media, because in comic, like there's so much that's been said already that I already agree with. I'm not gonna repeat any of that. But like when the New Mutants film was coming out, something that really bothered me was the whitewashing, and something that bothered me even more was one of the things they're like, oh, but it's fine because we've got queer rep. And I'm just like, hello, queer people of color exist.
Thank you.
Like, it's frustrating that people of color don't get to be represented as multiply nuanced human beings. Like, there are disabled people of color. There's queer people of color, there's queer disabled people of color, they're immigrants, you know, and it's just like, where are we going to get those stories? And there's some really powerful moments that media does just about right, but I want them to build on that. One of the most amazing scenes for me watching WandaVision was seeing Monica Rambeau, a Black woman, deflect police bullets. Those were law enforcement bullets. And there was something so amazingly powerful. And again, I'm not Black, I don't live in the States, but with the global conversation around police brutality being what it is, and seeing that moment, it's just like, you have these moments, you have these really cool times where you can build on that. And that's what excites me about Cocoa, because it's, you know, it's a safe space for a marginalized group that isn't built on colonization. Like, you look at history and you look at all, like, you know, you've got the whole rhetoric of, oh, the founding fathers were fleeing persecution in England. You've got, you know, those kinds of conversations, but you don't have this blank slate of an uninhabited world, and you get to actually discuss what an ethical way of building a new society is. And it's like, where's the politics of that? That's what I want to see. And I feel like they have moments that they can build on, but they sometimes just don't feel like they're brave enough to do it.
You guys are getting
just
so
push
deep.
through.
It's about the bravery of it. That's the truth.
You know,
You guys are getting so deep. I just want some sexy Filipino to be on there to help my like social life and to get my dating life in order. I just want that representation of not somebody who's just smart or whatever it is. I need some like somebody out there like a Henry Golding, you know, in Crazy Rich Asians, who's gonna make everybody turn around and be like, oh, what about people that are Asian?
It's this really weird thing of like, you don't want representation to be badly done, but that doesn't mean the characters have to be amazing. Like, you can have mediocre characters done well, because if white people are allowed to be mediocre and have their fairy tale endings, so should people of color.
Yeah.
I just want to see a sexy Filipino. I know, because, you know, we represent, you know, like everybody else is like, you know, it's this, people complain about being exoticized, you know, like, and sexualized in that way. It's like, you can sexualize other people too, and that's cool with me. You know, that's it. That's just me being selfish.
Do you think there's a reason why we're not really seeing people write? Like, I know I've never written a comic because I don't know how to draw, but I can write a story easy. Do you think maybe if we just, those people who are sitting around like us right now were to do the comics ourselves, maybe we'd all be a little bit more satisfied? Because it's like the same people writing stuff right now, and it's usually the underground stuff where people aren't complaining because, you know, they found a comic on the way to the subway or something like that, and it's somebody wrote what they're not seeing.
Ray, you can answer your question on that. I think. Sorry.
Somebody
else go first.
Good. I'll go after you.
I was going to say, to answer Reika's question on that, I think the challenge we have as BIPOC people in doing that, yes, we're doing it, but you have to remember, like, there's what, like 70 years of established precedent by cis hetero white men. So there's a mentorship there. Like, for instance, sometimes I'll read comic books by BIPOC people, like independent things, and sometimes they're not that great. Like, they have potential, but I can see they didn't have the mentorship or the example of what came before them to hone them in, and they don't have those mentors saying, like, they don't have somebody like Stan Lee or any of the other people at Marvel, like pulling them aside and saying, okay, this is how you do this for this character. One, because they don't know how to write characters of color, the people who are big ones like that, and two, it's not a motivation for them because they don't need their representation.
Well, and a lot of this, and we were going to bring this up, but we know that we are spending a large chunk of our time today together. We do want to continue this conversation, but we were going to discuss corporate failures versus readership failures. So that's probably going to come up in the next time that we do this, and we would love to have all of you back for that conversation. But I think that is a big part of it is, you know, corporations, they want to be safe. They want to do what they can do to make the most money. And they don't think that the readership at large wants to see those stories. And I would completely disagree with that. I think when you do show those stories, we have seen, for example, with Black Panther, we have seen that this can be done in a way that will make you money and that can reach and resonate with so many people. So I will jump to Pat in just a second, but something that I personally would love to see is I want to see more Mexican American experiences, because Sink, as much as I love him, not Sink, Skin, I'm sorry. Skin, as much as I love him, you don't look at Skin and see a Mexican American man, you know, and people, I'm like 5th or 6th or 7th, I don't even know. My family has been on this side of the border since before the border crossed us. We were literally here. We were landowners here. We were Mexican landowners here when it was still Mexico on my mother's side. We have documentation to prove it. There was like this big lawsuit about it that still hasn't been resolved. You know, my family has been here and I'm always seen as the immigrant. I went to Mexico exactly one time. That was for part of my college studies. I got a scholarship and they made me go. But I mean, other than that, I think I went on vacation there, like on a cruise once. But I have really no ties to Mexico. None of my family, none of us are from Mexico. My grandparents are not from Mexico. My cousins are not from Mexico. My aunts and uncles, my grandparents, they were all born here. And like their kids' names are things like Crystal. You know, like this, we do not have this immigrant story. I would love to see those of us who have been here as part of BIPOC experiences in America shown more in media. We are not necessarily immigrants. We're not necessarily gangbangers. And when we are, there is still a richer story than just we crossed the border. I want to see more of that. I don't think that that is being shown. And Dylan and I had a conversation yesterday, and I said, you know, when we talk about, you know, especially Hispanic characters in the Marvel universe, a lot of them are Puerto Ricans. We got so many tigers that are Puerto Ricans. We have Richter, who is Mexican American. They don't really talk about that much. We have Skin, who was dead for over a decade. And as far as Mexican American characters, that's all I can think of offhand. Everybody else is from Brazil or, you know, Argentina or wherever, but they're not from Mexico. And that is the largest demographic here in the United States. Why are these stories just left on the table? I guarantee you make these stories, Mexican kids are going to buy that shit. They are going to be, you know, all he wrote out, and we haven't seen that. And even though I am not African American, something that, so I'm a stepmother. My oldest son is Black, and my middle son is mixed race. He's half Mexican, half Black. When I took them to see Black Panther, my middle son, I don't know why, it was like a light bulb went off in his head. And he said, Mom, I had no idea Black women were that beautiful.
Aww.
Like, what are you talking about? All these Black women that we know and that we hang out with. And he was like, Mom, even Belle is gorgeous. I was like, okay.
Wow.
You know, like the girl he's interested in now, he's almost 20 now. And, you know, she's a very beautiful young Black woman. And for me, that I can't tell you how much that means to me, because it's like, I think that we always have this idea that's very negative about Black women. And I understand kind of where it comes from. And it just makes me mad, because I don't see Black women as being unattractive. I don't see Black women as being overly aggressive, because I guess I know them and I love them, and I want to see them being celebrated for their beauty and their excellence. So if it took this movie to make my son have this idea, this understanding about Black women as they truly are, then I want hella more of that. And let's get more of that representation in media, in comics, in these stories. I think the newest Star Trek, you know, with Sonica Martin Green, they had this beautiful story of Black love that you just hardly ever get to see. And it's working. And I just want to see more of that. And I'm sorry, I know I kind of just shoehorned the conversation, but I think these stories are so important. They can be done so well, and they need to be done more often.
Yes, amen.
All right, Pat.
Oh, what am I responding to? What am I listening to?
Wrapping up by saying what we hope for the future.
I guess I would like to see more stories about the immigrant experience, and like personally for me, like that experience kind of became like I don't really feel like I'm part of the majority group in this country, but I also don't feel like that super attached to like my ethnic community as well, for a whole host of like personal events in my life. So like, what does it look like? Because it seems like a lot of the stories we see is sort of just that opposition between like you're part of this ethnic community, you don't feel at home with the majority culture, and then I guess you just belong with your ethnic community, but it's not really been my experience. And so like, what does that story look like, and what does that mean for a person in that circumstance? And like, what other kinds of communities might you create if you're in that sort of in between space?
I love that too. So we are getting short on time, as we knew we would. So let's take a few extra minutes. Caribou, if you'd like to go ahead and speak up, and then we will kind of start wrapping up.
Yeah, sure. I'll be quick. I just want to see, obviously, more Afrofuturism represent, just like all media, you know? I mean, I would love to see more like comic books that kind of have a very urbanized, I think is good for us to kind of go back into, you know, these stories of urbanization. I know like it got a lot of flack in the 90s and the way that like urbanization was presented, you know what I mean? But I think we're at a point now where we can like, you know, tell stories about how people live in cities and how people live in their environments, and especially like, you know, in quote unquote urban environments, with people who are immigrants that come from so many different backgrounds, and that are brown and black and yellow and all the, you know, colors in between, that are, and you know, in reference to also indigeneity. I think that would be a great series to kind of focus on, if like, you know, we haven't really seen like the X-Men kind of do that. And like, I'm always for the X-Men peering into those metaphors, and trying to like describe them. Like, you know, even when there was District X, for instance, that was like a really good example of like seeing how like these communities and like these urban situations were evolving around their city and their environment, but see also how like starkly different that made them from like, you know, other competing SPB communities in the area. So I think that's gonna be great. I think it'd be great if there was like more of an Afrofuturist bent. I mean, not even when I say Afrofuturist, I don't even mean like, you know, like sci-fi or whatever the case may be, but just on like how we're able to inhabit narratives of the future and how we live in the future that we haven't been included in a history up until now. That's why I think the success of Bridgerton is really important, because Bridgerton, you know, it does kind of have a retroactive like filling in of history of what was very really happening. You know, it was just like these Black monarchs, this Black aristocracy in this period that was whitewashed. I would love to see more and more of these series come out where it's the less it goes behind the whitewashing really of certain scenarios and like certain moments in history in certain regions, and tells the actual story of what was happening. You know what I mean? I don't care how cheesy it is, but like it opens up the possibility of us bridging in the gaps of like, you know, those moments in history and people taking part, you know, in those moments of history through media. So that's what I'd like to see more of, really, to be succinct.
Anyone else that didn't answer, if you by chance have anything that you want to quickly say that you would like to see in the future, go ahead, Jeremy.
I don't know. Well, it's a big ask. I'm not sure if it's going to happen or not, but I have I've termed it the minority perfection fallacy, where to have a character who is a quote unquote minority, they tend to be a Mary Sue. They tend to be perfect. They can do anything. They don't really have a lot of limits, and they have the right answer all the time. Yeah. They make the right choices, and they're always so good and so perfect. And there's this idea that it's Shonda Rhimes addressed it one time in Scandal, where Olivia and her father, they're talking, and he says to her, "What have I told you?" And she kind of mumbled. He said, "Tell me, what have I told you?" He said, "You have to be twice as good, twice as fat, twice as smart to get half as much." And that captures the minority perfection fallacy, what I call it. And I think it's a big ask, but I would really like to see BIPOC people in media, comics specifically, we're talking about right now, that don't have to prop up that fallacy.
Yes.
To be just as loved and just as respected and just as appreciated as the white characters, they have to be twice as powerful and twice as good and all that stuff. I need that to go away. The minority perfection fallacy, that perfection fallacy needs to go away. And it's a big ask because it's been reiterated and reconstituted and reformed and reshaped, but it always comes up. And as much as I love Aurora Monroe, she is the perfect example of the Mary Sue. She's the perfect example. Storm finds a way, and it's powerful and it's wonderful, but she's a perfect example of the minority perfection fallacy. The reason she is so loved by so many people is because she reiterates that fallacy. And that fallacy needs to go away.
She's palatable.
So it's a big ask because it's so pervasive, but that's what I want.
What were you going to say, Rasan?
I was saying basically she's palatable in a way that is not threatening to white people, basically. Like, oh, this character is so good, this character is so powerful. So even though she's this powerful person, don't be afraid of her power because she will never use it against you, even though you fear and hate her.
Yeah.
I wonder how Storm would be received if instead of being a weather witch, she was a telepath, and how threatening would be perceived versus bald, creepy ass Professor Xavier, who does some really horrible, terrifying shit, but people still trust him for some reason. And how would I wonder get that if she was a Black man or a Black woman with those same types of powers and doing the same type of shit?
I wonder what the response to Scarlet Witch would have been at the end of WandaVision if she was still Romani.
Yeah. Or even like looking at the people who are the face of Krakoa, like Professor Xavier, Magneto. These are white cis men. If you had a Krakoa, a separatist nation, sovereign nation, with a face that the spokespeople were BIPOC people, I mean, already Krakoa has caused a divide amongst fans for that reason. But I think it would be even more divisive in a way that I'd welcome. Not divisive, it would be more provocative and more to the point, because as we know throughout history, there have been sovereign BIPOC communities right here in the United States. Like you look at Seneca Village in New York City. Seneca Village is where modern day Central Park is. It was a Black utopia that was destroyed because of what it was like. And I think if we had BIPOC people being the face of Krakoa versus these two old white men, I think people would have even more problems with it.
Yep, for sure.
I would love to see a story written like that. But we are really running out of time here. We had to let Pat leave.
Yes. I wanted to say real quick, I do appreciate all of you guys for joining us for this. And in case some of you haven't done it, but I think I know all of you from Facebook, Raika and Caribou, you're new in my life. But I just want to encourage you guys that if you haven't already, but I'm sure most of you have, even though it does seem very gimmicky, I really do encourage you to buy the Marvel Voices books that are coming out. I think most of you know that Regina and I interviewed a lot of the creators that were in the Indigenous Voices Marvel book that came out. And a lot of them have future work with Marvel because of how great the Indigenous Voices book did. So I encourage you to buy those Voices books, even though they do seem very gimmicky.
Wow. Oh, and my local comic book shop has a guide to Black comic books. So like written by, Black people, of people, for people, and so like I just recently bought one, and I'm going to read through it and kind of see the cool stuff that's in it. And if you want to send me your address, I can send some.
Sweet.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. And I know that we are already messaging each other in the group chat, but me and Regina always end our episodes by saying, if you want people that might be listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, because we might put it on Instagram, like TV or whatever, go ahead and tell us your Instagram or Twitter or whatever, or you can just decline if you want people who are listening to follow you, maybe, I don't know.
Or to join the group that you're in. So if you don't want to say your personal stuff, but you say, I'm in House of Storm, represent, you can say that as well.
Yeah, so we'll start with Raika.
Oh, I don't have any public social media, so I'm in House of Storm.
And Jonathan?
You can find me in every house, and it's not true. House Bex, or you can find me at Jonathan Richard on Instagram.
Caribou?
You can find me on at Osnapulon 5000. That's at OHSNAPULON 5000 on Insta.
And Rasan?
There's some NSFW stuff in there, but don't worry.
I'm, of course, in House of X on Facebook. I'm a psychic butterfly. I want to join other houses, but I feel like I might be overwhelmed, so I haven't. On Instagram, it's my name, at Rasan Chisholm. I do have Twitter, the same Twitter handle as my Instagram, but I rarely ever tweet, but you can still find me there.
And Carl?
I have very limited because I'm an administrator at education, but my personal Instagram is Kamustaka, which is KAMUSTAKA, which is how are you in Tagalog.
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
It's just Sam.
Nice.
You can find me in House of X and House of Marvel LGBTQ. But also, if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's Ibsam IBTISAM 1705. And if you want to get my more kind of overly political intellectual side, that's Ibzor on Twitter, IBZOR.
Thank you.
I thought we did get that side.
We did, and I appreciate that we did. Jeremy?
I am in House of X and House of Storm and a number of other House of X houses. I'm on Instagram as well, but I don't check it as much as I should. So J. Joe Abstracted for Twitter is where I am.
Okay. And anyone that's listening, if you did like everything that you heard from Patrick, you can find Patrick in any of the houses, but you can specifically find him in House of Frost. He's the biggest White Queen fan in the world. And even though he's not here, and he slightly mentioned it at the beginning, I will tell you his little story. He does evolve as a fan because his number one first X-Men character was Jean Grey, and he will not tell anyone that, but she was. And it's actually his email is something like jeangreyphoenix@hotmail.com or something like that. He emailed me once and I thought it was spam. Like I couldn't think that it was him. But yes, he evolved and now he likes Emma way more than Jean. But anyway,
that's what we do, we evolve.
Yes. Regina, if people wanted to find you online, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at the Red Queen of X. I'm also an admin over at House of Moonstar for people who want to follow Indigenous characters. Also, we have a House of Bishop, House of Scarlet Witch. Who else do we have, Dylan? We got a bunch.
We have, any X-Men character you can think of, and Storm, Proud Star, Penance. We have a lot of BIPOC ones too.
Nice.
But Storm is the most active one.
So follow us there.
That's all Storm fans. Oh my God.
Yes, check out all of our wonderful BIPOC.
Aren't we up to like 2,000 now in House of Storm? Is it up to 2,000?
Y'all go so hard. Y'all go too hard for that girl. She's like, can she stop bullets in space?
Are y'all like
Just remember, Storm is an energy manipulator. It's not just weather, it's energy manipulation.
Also, if any of you guys are on CBR, IMO Snappylon 5000. I have 3 no prizes in the books on Monet. Thank you very much.
Okay.
She's a legend.
She is. And Dylan, where can we find you?
Everybody, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at warpath_Dylan. That is warpath_DYLAN. Once again, me and Regina appreciate you guys so much for being a part of this, and sorry that it took up so much time of your day, but it was voices that we really wanted to be on so everybody can hear, because it's voices that might not get heard when they should.
Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you.
Wonderful. It was really wonderful.
This was so beneficial my soul needed this.
Hey, man.